Hello and welcome to AXSChat. I'm delighted to welcome James Partridge to the show today. First met James, actually I've seen James lots of times, public speaking, but I first actually met and got to talk to James last year in Geneva as part of the ILO event around disability and the future of work. So it's taken us a little while to coordinate this, but I'm delighted to have you with us. And you've been running a campaign this week as well around face equality. And so tell us a little bit more about, I'd love to know about your story, and then also about face equality, the organization and the campaign.
Well, briefly on my story, and you can probably see I've got a fairly distinctive face. It's a result of some very severe burns when I was 18, from which I really did have to battle to recover and adjust to. And it probably took me 6 or 7 years to do that. Eventually, I ended up as a dairy farmer, businessman, teacher, and I had no intention of getting into anything remotely like, the charity world or not-for-profit world. But I ended up in '92 setting up a charity called Changing Faces in the UK, and ran that for 25 years to try to build a new form of help, really, for people with any form of facial disfigurement, a facial difference, and there are many, many different causes. To try to help them build confidence, esteem, and above all, the sense of independence in a world where looking perfect is deemed incredibly important. And that then led on 25 odd years later to establishing Face Equality International, which is, I'm thrilled to be running it. It started with just 9 NGOs around the world. We now have 35 in our alliance, and we've got some important things to do. This week is the 2nd International Face Equality Week, and it's produced some fantastic social media, because of lockdown, social media activity all over the place.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have played a small part in the social media.
I think you did, and actually we should say that anybody can still do the selfie challenge. Deborah, I'm looking at you. You can do it too, and it's apparently there are now over 1,000 selfies that have been done all the way around the world from people with and without unusual faces.
Yeah,
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Count me in. I'm going to do it. I'll do it today.
So what you have to do is you take a selfie, and then you have an imperfect circle, an incomplete circle around the selfie, and then post it with the hashtag. And what's the hashtag again, James? It's
hashtag Face Equality.
Hashtag Face Equality.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I should say a bit more about where the campaign for face equality came from, but it's like race equality and gender equality and all those other rights that have become movements eventually. This face equality is in its infancy, really, but we're going places.
Excellent. I think this is it is absolutely a rights issue, as much as it is a sort of disability issue. It's that sort of intersectionality, because in many ways people with cosmetic differences to the way that they look are not physically disabled in the way that a lot of people would think that would consider to be a disability, but at the same time it has an impact on their life, like you're saying, with racial equality and sexual equality, and that people perceive you to be different and treat you to be different.
Yes, and I'm afraid the stories of injustice and exclusion, low expectations, difficulty getting work, harassment at work, abuse on social media, just because of the way you look, are really very unpleasant reminders that this world is far from straightforward. And I actually, in a way, in lockdown, the social connectedness that we all yearn for is not quite so easy for people with facial disfigurements, because they find many social encounters awkward, difficult, and that shouldn't be. Face equality is where people meet and there is no sense of prejudice or stigma or assumption, stereotype. People meet. That's what we're aiming at.
James, you are releasing a book, right? So can you update us on what is that book about? Your story, about experiences? Tell us about it, please.
Well, the first book I wrote was very much a self-help guide. It was a do-it-yourself guide. If you experience a facial disfigurement from any cause, from birth, from birthmark, from burns like mine, from violence, from facial paralysis, from any cause, skin conditions, facial cancer, these are some of the lessons. That was my first book, tips, ideas, strategies, and it went down well, but people frequently said, well, actually, we'd like much more of your story, please. And I said, well, one day I'll get around to writing it. And the years went by, and then people said, well, I'd really like to hear more about the psychosocial empowerment package that you put together at Changing Faces. And I said, well, I'll get around to writing that one day. And then, of course, the campaign for face equality and where that came from, and the stigmas that underpin facial discrimination, facism, as we might call it, that all needed writing down too. So I have actually tried in this book to combine the personal, the professional, and the political. So whether it works or not, anyway, but it's there. I'm really pleased to have finished it.
James, it was a pleasure to meet you in Geneva. I know that's where Neil met you too, during the ILO conference. And during your presentation, your presentation really made me think in a way that I had not thought about. And you had used, and I just want to tee this up and let you talk about it, but you were showing how people with disfigured faces have been used to scare the hell out of us. It's been used as the monsters to frighten the children. And I really had not thought about it from that perspective, how society uses the boogeyman as somebody, it's always the bad guys. It's the bad characters, it's the monsters. And I just had never really thought about it from that perspective. And I was just wondering if you would do a better job than I just did to talk about that, because it's a really powerful thing.
It's the deep-seated stigmas that are embedded in our culture. They're embedded in children's stories, Beauty and the Beast. They're embedded in pantomimes, The Ugly Sisters. They're embedded in literature, and probably most painfully of all, they're embedded in film, where scarring has been used time and time again, monotonously, as a lazy device to depict villainy, moral degradation, moral inadequacies. The horror movies are obviously probably the worst examples. Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street. But we think of the Bond movies as a classic, oh gosh, do we need another scarred villain? Oh, of course, and apparently this new movie that's coming out will have two facially scarred villains. I mean, why not?
Yeah, because if you're scarred, you obviously are a villain. I know Phantom of the Opera. I mean, my God, he's a horrible.
That's another one.
But I never thought about it, and there's so many. There's so many.
I think the phantom is a very interesting one, because that is a classic self-imposition of the stigma on the character himself. And so many of us have had to battle this stigma in our own heads. It's as if it's so deeply rooted in there. You know, if you look like this, you aren't just a bit physically different, you're morally deficient in some way. And that's a terrible thing to have to deal with. And of course, I mean, I was speaking in the ILO in what was very heavily and fascinatingly employment-based event. And the way that these myths, stereotypes carry into corporate culture, education culture, cannot be underestimated, sadly. So
I have a really good friend of mine that works with me, and when she was a baby, the doctor made a mistake when he was delivering her with forceps, and he split her face apart. And I think she's just I think she's beautiful, because I judge people, and I guess judge is the wrong word, but I do based on who they are. Who are you showing me that you are, as you know? And
yeah.
So I look at her and I just think she's a beautiful soul, because she is. But she told me things that I just had not had the experience with. For example, they have no baby pictures of her. They have no pictures of her when she was a little girl, because she had operation after operation. And she told me that one day she went to school and she had real bad scarring on her face, and the kids were making fun of her, saying, "Oh, you've got dirt on your face." And she came home just crying and hysterical, saying, "I'm never going back to school again." And her dad's like, "That's it. We're going to get the surgery to get the scars removed." And the trauma that she faced, even the little trauma of, there are no childhood pictures of her, because we don't want to take pictures of. So if your family doesn't even want to take pictures of you, it must have major psychological issues.
I fear you're very right. And the interesting point that we could just take out of your story is that the psychologists that I've worked with over many years would say and confirm that you don't have to have an all facial disfigurement for it to be difficult and distressing. Actually, the cleft lip and palate is the classic example, which affects the nose as well.
And she had that.
She had that. And that is extremely noticeable when you meet somebody, when you're talking to them. It's in the communications triangle between the edge of the eyes and the bottom of the chin. Anything in that zone, the loss of an eye or squint, or as I say, some kind of alteration around the mouth or nose, these are very, very significant socially. And the child will grow up with all manner of experience, and hopefully she'll have a lovely peer group and so on, and sounds like your friend did. But
she did, but she struggled. She struggled with,
and of course,
husband,
come into your teens, and well, where we live in beauty culture here, and can't you get that fixed? A bit of cosmetic surgery. And so we are working against these very deep-seated stigmas, which is what I describe in the book, and without really bringing them out into the full light of day, I don't think we're going to get them recognized and acted upon. So that's where I'm coming from. I guess the thing that really angers me more than anything when I
wonder if we've lost connection for a second, or is it just?
Yeah, as he comes back, I just even though I really am empathetic with our community, I hadn't thought about it from the lens of what James is talking about. It's a huge issue. It's huge. Oh, there you go. You came back. Okay, go. And you can't. You jumped. We lost you when you said the thing I'm really angry about, and then we lost you.
Well, the thing that really angers me more than anything is when I hear stories of children whose expectations of what they can achieve have been so low in childhood because their teachers haven't really believed that they can achieve anything. And although there have been some interesting books written for children, one which comes to mind is Wonder. I don't know if you've come across that.
No,
R.J. Palazzio's book about a boy with a condition called Treacher-Collins syndrome. And you know, it's quite good at opening up the issues, but it ends with a sort of somewhat bluey niceness, if you will, where I want to say, look, give this boy respect and treat him fairly as anybody else would be. Don't treat him as, gosh, you are brave, because that doesn't help. That does not help.
No, so I'm really interested in one of the comments that you talked about before, which was around the sort of internalized fascism, if you like. So quite often we hear from the disability community that they absorb and internalize ableism. So whilst society has, you know, the bigotry of low expectations, they then absorb them for themselves. So is this something that you I mean, you didn't grow up with your injuries, but you were still relatively young when you changed, your face changed and how you look changed, and you're still at an age which is very impressionable. Did you then experience that internalization of expectations about yourself?
It was deeply disturbing, Neil. I was 18 when I had my accident, and I have to say I had, you know, good looks. And I traded on them, and I thought that they were vital for, you know, success in life. And then, sort of 3 months after my accident, I had to look in the mirror, and my stomach just disappeared. I mean, I couldn't believe that this is what my life was now going to be. And I'd never met anybody who'd made anything of any sort looking like that. And it's just, it was a terrible, it was a terrible moment. And yet there was also a strange, crazy response from inside, which says, all these nurses and family and so on are helping you and supporting you. You can't look too distressed. And so that was all part of the sort of bottling up of this frustration, anger, shame, everything. And it took me years to unravel it. Actually, there was a moment when you can probably see I've got a rather nice smooth chin here. It came from my back. I'm very attached to it. It was an amazing piece of surgery. And I remember going to see the plastic surgeon afterwards, and he sort of casually said, "So what should we do next?" And I said, "Well, look, actually, I think I'm going to really go and try to be a citizen now and not a patient anymore." But I mean, I had no idea how I was going to do that, but that was 4.5, 5 years on, and I knew that I had to crack the internal struggle. Curiously, feminism helped me enormously with that, and I came out the other end 5 or 6 years afterwards.
I mean, your last comment is super interesting. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think this is a really interesting lens, and one that we've not necessarily explored before. So
well, I mean, for some absurd reason, I ended up, I did a first degree in Oxford, which was totally unexpectedly, you know, it wasn't a degree that I was expecting at all. I got a decent degree, and then I couldn't think, you know, how do I get a job with this? I mean, I had no idea. I'll go and do a master's. And I got a room in a house in North London that happened to be the house of two Marxists and their small boy. And over copious amounts of red wine and stuff, I started to imbue feminism and Marxism. Well, I sort of tried not to read too much of that, actually, but you know, feminism was all over the place, in every comment, in every remark, in every, and I couldn't get it. I thought, oh no, I'm a progressive person, but I realized I just had not understood what oppression was about. And then gradually, and it was one particular book by Doris Lessing, just brought it all out to me in a most amazing way. And I realized that, oh God, the parallel here is immense. The chains that I had been wrapping myself with, and society had been wrapping around me, were chains that I could remove, and if I wanted to. And it was a breakthrough moment. I mean, there were lots of other things along the way, but that was a really significant intellectual sort of shift of consciousness. I'm sure that other people you have interviewed would have, particularly women, would say the same. That whole movement was so utterly radical and life-changing. Deborah?
You're on mute, Deborah, if you were going to speak.
No, I was just listening to you. It's so profound as you start peeling back the layers of this issue. It's just really profound, and it's I believe that I know that you know the media, the movie makers, the Hollywood, the Bollywoods. Can't really speak for the Bollywood, but I know that right now in the United States, the movies and the media and all that, they really are trying to be very, very sensitive to inclusion of people with disabilities. And there's a lot of reasons why that's happening, but it's beautiful. The actors that are being included with very severe disabilities, and they usually steal the show because they're such interesting characters. And I just think that this message hasn't gotten to them yet. They're not even realizing what they're accidentally doing. And so it's just such an important issue that I just was feeling really grateful, you know.
There's one British actor called Adam Pearson, who's appeared in a number of fairly big films now, including one with Scarlett Johansson. And I cannot remember the names of the film, except I think one of them is called Under the Skin. But he has made what I would suggest is some kind of breakthrough in a small way, of course. But I do hope that trend, if it is a trend, goes on and starts to include particularly women with unusual faces, playing parts that are not the token, you know, person with a facial disfigurement, but mainstream parts. They're perfectly capable of it, of course. And of course, there is also that
We've got another slight glitch on the connection here. One of the joys of the internet. James is based on... James, are you back? We just lost you for a second.
difficult on Guernsey. Hear me?
You broke up for a minute. If you could just repeat, your last thought, that would be helpful.
It was just the thought that, of course, the casting of films with children with facial differences is going to go on being an awkwardness. We think that it's entirely right that a child with a condition, a facial condition, should play the part of in a film about somebody with a facial condition. Why not? I mean, why have to substitute somebody for that? But those are controversial areas still, but hopefully over the next period, they will become more and more, it's obvious.
Well, and that's why we support what you're doing, because this is game-changing work. So
thank you.
That's why I know Neil really wanted to make sure that you came on, and we all agreed.
Absolutely.
Can I just say one thing about the area of employment and work? Because I think the new ideas that are starting to emerge about inclusion and diversity really do need to get close up to disability in all its forms. I'm a huge supporter of Caroline Casey's initiative, because I think she is not letting them get away with, what does she call it? Diverse-ish.
Yeah.
It can't be allowed. You've got to take each of these issues and deal with it properly.
Yeah. We are also huge fans of Caroline and the Valuable 500. In fact, we're quite well engaged with Caroline and think what she's doing is amazing. And yes, it can't be tokenism. I think that what you're doing is really great. And I yes, of course, we've been aware of feminism and the sort of the rights movement, but the lens that you viewed it through and your personal sort of use of feminist principles to let go of a lot of your emotional baggage, I think is something really powerful and positive that I think our audience will really engage with. So,
thank you very much for the chance. I hope you'll look out for Face It, facial disfigurement, and my fight for face equality. And you can find it, of course, on the usual channels, but you can also find it on my website, jamespartridge.wordpress.com. There you are.
Excellent. You're done like a pro, James.
Yes, and we have a few sponsors that we want to.
Yes. So we also would like to thank Barclays Access, MyClearText, and Microlink for supporting us to keep these conversations going, because they're powerful conversations, and we want to make this world a more inclusive one. So thank you very much, James. We really look forward to continuing the conversation on Twitter.
Thank you very much indeed. I look forward to that too.